Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to take a look at a specific street gang, Los Solidos.
hmm
You shared an interest in understanding how these groups form, how they evolve over time, that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. It's a complex world.
So we've pulled together some info from like news articles, there's an archived blog post, and even their Wikipedia page.
Okay, standard sources for this kind of thing.
Exactly. And the mission here is really just to get past the headlines, try and understand the origins, the challenges they faced, and, well, their ongoing story.
Sounds good. Where do we start? The beginning, I guess.
Let's do it. Okay, so unpack this for us.
All right, so what jumps out right away is how Los Solidos actually came together. It was the early 1990s in Hartford, Connecticut, founded by a guy named Lawrence Povey.
Okay.
But here's the thing, they weren't like a totally new group popping up. They were actually formed when two smaller unnamed gangs merged.
Oh, interesting. Why'd they do that?
Well, the main reason seems to be protection, strength in numbers, especially against bigger, more established groups around at the time, like the Latin Kings.
Ah, okay. So it was kind of like a strategic alliance.
Exactly. Sort of a survival tactic, probably.
hmm
It suggests those smaller groups felt vulnerable on their own. Merging gave them more power, more security.
Like small companies merging to compete with the big guys. Makes sense.
Yeah, precisely. And it wasn't just about numbers, likely also about pooling resources, territory, whatever strengths each group had.
And you said Hartford, but they didn't just stay there, did they?
No. They started expanding pretty early on. Their operations went beyond Hartford. Springfield, Massachusetts became a key spot for them too,
Uh-huh.
and probably other northeastern cities as well. Spreading out like that often means setting up turf, recruiting, which can lead to clashes with whoever's already there.
Right. Which brings us to the name, Los Solidos, the Solid Ones. Fits with that merger origin, that idea of unity for protection.
It does. But solidity didn't mean peace, apparently. Their early history was also marked by a pretty major conflict, specifically with those Latin kings we mentioned.
Yeah, tell us about that. That feud sounds significant.
Oh, it was. Happened around 1993, 1994. These intense gang wars, they just cause massive disruption, violence, arrests. It destabilizes everything.
And wasn't there a big legal event around that time, too? Something about a gang leader being sentenced?
Yes, exactly. It added another layer to the chaos. Jorge Rivera now, he was the president of a different major Puerto Rican street gang. Not the Latin Kings specifically. He got hit with, get this, 13 concurrent life sentences.
Wow. For what?
A whole slew of things. 4 murders, drug trafficking, other serious crimes. Taking a figure like that off the board, you can imagine the ripple effect.
Yeah, it creates a huge power vacuum, right? Everyone else scrambling.
Precisely. It would have shifted the whole dynamic. Opportunities for some gangs, maybe more danger for others. It likely intensified the situation between Los Solidos and the Latin Kings, too.
So that mid-90s period sounds really turbulent. How did Los Solidos even navigate that? Did they collapse?
That's the fascinating part. They didn't. They showed a real resilience. The sources show that after that period, by the early 2000s, they were regrouping, reforming.
Really? How does a group bounce back from that kind of disruption?
Good question. It points to maybe a strong underlying structure or just the continued factors that draw people into games in the first place. And interestingly, around this time, 2008, they actually got featured on that TV show, Gangland.
Oh, yeah, I remember that show. Put them on the map, I guess.
For better or worse, yeah. Gave them notoriety, maybe even helped recruitment, who knows.
Yeah.
But it definitely signaled they were back in operation.
But regrouping didn't mean the violence stopped, right? I think you mentioned an arrest in 2008 that kind of highlights the ongoing issues.
Absolutely. Travis Bones Daly, a high-ranking member. He was arrested in January 2008 for murdering a rival gang member.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. When he committed that murder, he was already on parole for a homicide he committed back in 1994.
Wow.
And guess who the victim was in that 94 case?
Let me guess. Latin Kings.
Bingo. A Latin Kings member. It just perfectly illustrates how deep and long-lasting these feuds are. Decades,
Yeah.
The animosity just carries on.
That's sobering. A cycle of violence, really.
Hmm.
Okay, so fast forward a bit. Mid-2010s, law enforcement must have been paying close attention. I read about a big bust in 2015.
Yeah, that was significant. A large-scale operation in Hartford South End. Dozens of Los Solidos members arrested.
What kind of charges?
The usual suspects, really, for an established gang. Weapons charges, drug sales. Indicates they were running a pretty diversified criminal operation by then.
Does a big sweep like that actually cripple a gang long term?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It definitely disrupts things, takes key people off the street, shakes up their operations. But often, it doesn't completely dismantle the organization. There's usually a structure, a recruitment
Mhm.
pipeline that can absorb hits.
And we see proof of that persistence, don't we? The Angel Carrasquillo sentencing in 2016.
Right, 80 years. An incredibly long sentence for a double murder tied directly to the drug sales within their territory. Huge penalty.
But even that didn't stop them.
Apparently not. The sources indicate they were still active right through the late 2010s, still present in Hartford, Springfield, across the Northeast. Some reports even suggested their presence was growing around 2019.
Growing. After all that, how?
Well, part of it seems tied back to that cycle we keep seeing. Some high-ranking members, guys who've been locked up for a long time, started getting released.
So experienced leadership returning to the fold.
Exactly. They come back with networks, knowledge, status. And the sources are clear. Their activities continued across the board, trafficking weapons, drugs, prostitution, other violent stuff. It's a business, essentially, albeit an illicit one.
The early 2020s seemed to confirm that continued activity pretty clearly.
Yeah, very concrete examples. March 2020, you had a member pleading guilty in federal court drugs and weapons charges. Then just a month later, April 2020, big joint operation. FBI and Hartford Police Task Force raids. Several more members arrested, again, for drug trafficking, distribution, weapons. It's this constant back and forth.
Right. Law enforcement keeps pushing.
And the gang finds ways to adapt or persist. And it continued to 2021 February. Elias Guzman, another high-ranking member, sentenced to 5 years federal time for drug trafficking.
It really paints a picture of, well, relentlessness on both sides, maybe.
It really does. It highlights just how tough it is to permanently shut down these deeply embedded groups. You take out one person, another steps up, or someone gets out of jail and comes back.
Let's circle back to the founder for a sec. Lawrence Beauvais. Started it all early 90s. We know he got jailed for another 15 years in 1997. We don't know why he was initially in, but that's a long stretch right when the gang was still relatively young.
That's a really crucial point. Taking the founder out of the picture that early. It must have had a huge impact.
How so, do you think?
Well, instant power vacuum, right? Who steps up? Does it lead to internal fights? Does the gang's direction change? New leaders might have different priorities, different styles. We're speculating a bit without more detail, but his absence during those formative years is definitely significant. Yeah, for sure. Okay, one last piece of context from the sources. It mentioned, kind of briefly, that the gang days of the 1980s are considered mostly gone in Hartford.
Interesting.
What does that tell us? How did that frame the Los Solidos story?
It suggests the whole landscape shifted, you know? Gang activity isn't static. The groups that dominate, the way they operate, even the reasons people join it, can all change decade by decade. Los Solidos emerging in the 90s were entering a different world than the gangs of the 80s. Different rivals, different pressures, maybe different opportunities.
So they're a product of their specific time, adapting as things change.
Exactly. These groups aren't frozen in time. They're dynamic. They respond to their environment. Okay, so let's try and bring this all together. Our deep dive shows Los Solidos formed, strategically for protection. They went through intense conflicts, especially with the Latin kings.
Faced major law enforcement actions multiple times. Big arrests, long sentences.
Yet somehow they've shown this remarkable ability to regroup, to adapt, and just keep going for, 3 decades now?
Precisely. It's a complex story of resilience, maybe you'd call it, internal gang dynamics, external pressures from rivals, constant pressure from law enforcement, and yet they persist. Their criminal activities continue.
Which really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? For you listening, think about this. Given all the arrests, the long prison terms, the internal feuds we've talked about, what is it that allows a gang like Los Solidos to survive and even, at times, seem to grow stronger again?
It's definitely not a simple answer. There are clearly deep-rooted factors at play.
Absolutely. And look, this has just been a glimpse based on the sources we had. If you find this interesting, maybe digging into the broader socioeconomic stuff, the conditions in cities that might fuel gang activity in the first place, that could offer a whole other layer of understanding.
Yeah, exploring those underlying issues could provide a much fuller picture of why these challenges persist in society. It's a tough, ongoing issue.